All right, thank you very much. Let's get started. We're pretty small group today. Thank you for joining. But because this group is so small, we can keep it really interactive. So if you have any questions coming up to this session, feel free to drop them in the chat. I have a chat open in the other monitor. So I'll be continuously monitoring that one. So if any questions about Sentinel in general, about the session or something else entirely, feel free to drop them in chat and I'll try to answer them. But the goal of this session is setting up Azure Sentinel in 45 minutes. I love Azure Sentinel myself. I think it's a great product that provides a lot of value for the time you have to put into it. So this is why I have built this session, is in order to show you how easy it is to enable Azure Sentinel within your environment. Um, First, I'd like to throw up a big thank you to Drago for creating the CloudEight Virtual Summit and also, of course, the sponsors, because without some of these sponsors, events like this wouldn't be possible. It's awesome that these are happening. It's without registration. You just easily can jump in and get going. So let's get started right away. If you don't know me, my name is Thijs de Conte. I live in Belgium and I'm a senior Microsoft 365 consultant working for the Collective Consulting. Besides that, I'm also a Microsoft MVP in the Enterprise and Mobility category. And during my day job and my community work, I'm focusing on endpoint management, security, and then also automation of both endpoint management and security. If you want to get in touch with me, you can easily find me on Twitter and on LinkedIn, where I try to stay active, share the latest news, but also share some of my blogs. And of course, I have my active blog, which is 365 by Days, but I also talk about endpoint management, security, and automation. And besides that, I'm also the technical editor for the Microsoft 365 security book, which is actually a security, an ebook which talks about the entire Microsoft 365 security stack and has monthly updates. So every month, when there's an update about some kind of Microsoft security product, will reflect it inside of the book. So we have one page to really see what has changed within the Microsoft 365 security landscape. So what are we going to talking about today? Well, I only think I have 6 slides, something like that. So it's really going to be demo heavy. What I want to show you is go inside of the portal and show you how easy it is to set up Azure Sentinel. So I will first start off with a small introduction into what is Azure Sentinel and why would you care. And then after that, it's just a demo of about half an hour, I think. And after that, we can have some Q&A if there's any questions. But like I said before, feel free to drop the questions into chat whenever relevant. I'll try to answer them as I go when we go into the introduction or inside of the demo. So the first question, of course, that I should start with is, why would you actually care about Azure Sentinel? Why would you use it? Why would it be of use for your organization? For that to understand, we need to know what Azure Sentinel is. Azure Sentinel is actually 2 products combined into one. It's a SIEM and SOAR product. SIEM means security information and event management, which means it will aggregate the logs from your environment, provide alerting on that, and allow you to monitor your environment for anomalies, receive notifications, certain alerts or incidents when a certain attack happens, or be able to hunt through the data that you have to find breaches that might have happened within your environment. Besides the SIEM parts of Azure Sentinel, it's also a SOAR. So SOAR is security, orchestration, automation, and response. It actually means the automation of responding to certain alerts or incidents. So when a certain alert or incident comes in, you can, of course, respond to that manually. But if you have to do everything manual, it will be a lot of work. So with Azure Sentinel, with the SOAR components, we can automate some certain mundane tasks within Azure Sentinel. And automation within Azure Sentinel is done through Azure Logic Apps, which is a different Azure solution. And Azure Logic Apps is often referred to as playbooks within Azure Sentinel. So Azure Sentinel is actually based on a lot of built-in components that are already there within the Azure portal, within Azure RAM. But Azure Sentinel just provides extra intelligence on top of it. So what do we start with? Well, we have a log analytics workspace. Log analytics workspace is probably something that you already know. It's used across the Azure environment. It's used to monitor VMs. It's used to monitor update compliance for your endpoints. It's also used for Azure Monitor. So it's really used heavily within the Azure environment. And Azure Sentinel is essentially a solution that you enable on top of log analytics. So this means that the data is actually stored inside of log analytics. Every data that you push to Sentinel is stored in log analytics. And Azure Sentinel, with its solution, it provides additional features that are typical to a SIEM and a SOAR product. So of course, the first step we have to do when we have our SIEM is we have to push data into Azure Sentinel to have these logs available to us. This can be done through data connectors. Data connectors are available within Azure Sentinel to easily take data from your environment and push it out into Azure Sentinel. Of course, this is a Microsoft solution. Everything with the Microsoft ecosystem is pretty well integrated. So enabling certain data connectors such as Teams, Azure, Microsoft Defender is really easy. It can be done actually with one click. But of course, there's a huge support for third-party connectors as well. I often hear the argument, okay, Azure Sentinel is great, but it's only for cloud and only for Microsoft product. This is not entirely the case. Of course, it's used also for other products, but sometimes it's unfortunately not that well integrated as of yet. Wow, am I not sharing my presentation? Thank you, Rick. That was really stupid. It's good that you told me. So this is the presentation. Thank you. You just missed my face with the social media links, the agenda, the introduction, which I talked about, and then here we have the Azure Sentinel architecture. You guys are able to see my screen now, right? All right, thank you. So we have log analytics to store the data. We have data connectors to collect the data, push it into Azure Sentinel. When we have that, it's time to analyze the data and do investigations. So here we can add some components in it. First of all, we have alert rules. Alert rules will be queries that we define that when certain hits, when certain data is matched, when there are hits, a alert will be created. And then we can use that alert to respond. Besides that, we can also do hunting. This is also referenced as proactive hunting. It's all the zero trust bus and the assume breach. What it essentially means is do not wait for an alert of an incident to come up, but also try to proactively look into the data for anomalies. That's what we call hunting. Besides alert rules and hunting, we also have workbooks. Workbooks are a great way to visualize data. You might also know it for the Azure AD sign-in logs, which has built-in workbooks inside of the Azure AD portal. Intune also has workbooks, but you can create your own workbooks, which will enable you to provide nice reports for your management to show insights into the workings of Azure Sentinel and what kind of added value it provides. Besides that, Azure Sentinel also has its own intelligence. So it will actively monitor your data as well, certain data sources. It will provide its own intelligence and create incidents and alerts based on the machine learning models that Azure Sentinel provides. This sounds fantastic. Unfortunately, a lot of it is marketing. There's no, I'm not going to say there's no added value because they're heavily working on it, but don't expect a Valhalla from it. Don't expect I can set up Azure Sentinel, and Azure Sentinel will do anomaly detection for me, and I don't have to do anything. That's not true. You still have to provide your own intelligence. When we have alerts and incidents, we have to, of course, respond to these alerts and incidents. So this is called the investigation, of course. Investigation is done through the portal or also through Jupyter Notebooks. That's an additional part within Azure Sentinel that will provide additional investigation purposes. It's a little bit difficult to start off at first, but it enables you to easily run a few queries, visualize the data, and have an investigation manual almost to go over the different steps somebody has to take to investigate an alert. Of course, I'm an automation guy. I love automation. Within Azure Sentinel, as said before, automation is done through Azure Logic Apps, which are a reference to as playbooks within Azure Sentinel. And then, of course, these playbooks can affect the incidents, but they can also affect the data sources. So you could say if condition A, B, and C are met, we will close the incident. But you can also say if condition A, B, and C are met, we will disable the user account. It could be an Azure Active Directory, or it could be an Active Directory, or we could quarantine the device. We could take immediate actions when we see certain specific cases happening within our environment. So this was the introduction. Now it's time to just dive into the Azure portal and show you how easy it is to set up Azure Sentinel for the first time, and also touch upon some of the things you have to keep in mind and some tips and tricks. But I'm repeating myself. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in chats, and I'll take care of them. So here we actually have a brand new tenant. Nothing is currently configured within this tenant. This goes to show you how you can set up Azure Sentinel from scratch. So as said before, Azure Sentinel is built on top of log analytics. So one of the prerequisites for Azure Sentinel is to have a log analytics workspace. You can use an existing one if you have one that has the data, for example, one that has the sign-in logs already ingested to it. You can reuse it one, or you can create a new one. So if you go to the Azure portal and we search for Azure Sentinel, you can easily click on it. And here we are greeted with the ability to create a new Azure Sentinel environment. When we click Create, you will be asked to select the Log Analytics workspace that this Azure Sentinel resource should reside upon. So we'll create a new one in this case. Also create a new resource group. So we should select the right regions. And then the pricing tier. By default, this is pay as you go. If you have a really high ingestion of Azure Sentinel, this means more than 100 gigabytes per day, you can change the pricing tier within Azure Sentinel. And we'll talk about that later. But for your Log Analytics workspace to create at first, you only have the option to select pay as you go. So we'll create an Azure Sentinel workspace. Let's hope, the Log Analytics workspace. Let's hope the deployment is fast today. Sometimes it can take a while, but usually it should be done within a minute. But with Azure, unfortunately, you don't always know what's up. So this will take a while, and we'll wait until the workspace is created. Perfect. So we then select the workspace that we want to use. We click Add. And what will happen now is the solution for Azure Sentinel will be enabled on top of that Log Analytics workspace. To show you what has happened, if we go to the resource group, which is currently within that subscription, so we go to the CloudEight demo resource group, you will see the LA workspace that we have, but in a little bit, we will see the Azure Sentinel solution right here. It doesn't seem to be loaded yet, but if you look into your Azure Sentinel resource group, you will find the Security Insight solution right here. So we can go back to the portal. Now we can select Azure Sentinel, and we can select our Azure Sentinel environments. So here we can go to the overview and we will be greeted with a dashboard. Of course, this dashboard doesn't say a lot at the moment because we don't have anything configured. So what is the first step to enable Azure Sentinel within your environment? It's to configure data connectors. So with data connectors, we will pull logs from a third-party source, could be Microsoft, could be your SaaS applications, could be on-premises, and we will push that data into Azure Sentinel. So for that, we can go to data connectors. So here you will see a huge list of connectors. Currently, there are 115, but this number is really growing fast. I think, if not mistaken, last week they were at around 105. So it's each month there will be a blog post out like we have pushed out 30 new data connectors. So they're really actively developing an easy way to enable the data. So of course, this is a Microsoft product, so you will find a lot of Microsoft sources. And the Microsoft sources are also typically the easiest ones to ingest. So if we click, for example, on Azure Active Directory, we can open the connector page. And from here on out, we can choose which logs we want to ingest into Azure Sentinel. So for example, if you want to look into the authentication part of Azure AD, so look into who's signing in, from where, are they using MFA, is somebody trying to brute force their password. These are kind of things that we can see in the sign-on logs. So we can click the sign-on logs and also the audit logs, for example. Audit logs will show you what is happening within our Azure AD environment. We will click on audit logs and then we will apply. Really easy. It's done already in the background. Azure AD will now be configured to push data from Azure AD to our log analytics workspace with Azure Sentinel enabled on top of it. So that means within a few minutes, we should have data in our environment. Of course, these are not the only connectors we have. You will find a lot of them in there. For example, if we go to the Better Mobile connector, if you open this page, you will see it's really natively integrated into the product as well, because within this product's console, you have the option to connect Azure Sentinel, provide the information that you need, and you can really easily push out the data from a third-party product into Azure Sentinel. Now, of course, if a product that you want to ingest data for into Azure Sentinel is not here, it doesn't mean that it's not supported. You have loads of capabilities within Azure Sentinel to easily ingest data into it. This can be done through Ceph, through syslog, through Logstash, or even just an API. You can create your own custom API calls to pull data from a product and push it out into Azure Sentinel. A great example is LastPass. At my company, we use LastPass to store the credentials of our customers. We have built a custom connector, which will go out to the API of LastPass, retrieve all of the logs that it has, and push them into Azure Sentinel to easily report on the activities going on within LastPass. So this is a connector you will not see yourself, but this is something customly built. So I just want to give this example because it's not because you don't see the connector in here, it's not possible. It's just it hasn't been officially approved by Microsoft and supported by Microsoft. But this is easily possible, and it's not rocket science to enable it. One of the difficult choices you will be asked when you're first setting up Azure Sentinel is, well, what kind of data should I put into Azure Sentinel? Should I enable my sign-on logs, Azure Activity, firewall, switching, access points, third-party SaaS application? Well, it's of course great that you want to push out all the data into Azure Sentinel, but it's an Azure resource. The cloud is not free. So if you push in every bit of data that you have without thinking about the requirements, without business requirements, you will be paying a lot for data ingestion into Azure Sentinel. And Azure Sentinel is not built to just put in all the data without thinking. What I like to do with my customers is I like to start with native Azure Microsoft connectors, because this is easy to implement and it doesn't, some of these built-in connectors also come for free. For example, the Azure Activity Data Connector, if we enable that one, it will be free for ingestion. You don't pay for it. Microsoft provides it as an ease of use. So that's really great to be able to connect Microsoft First data and explore the product. After you have explored the product, you can look into what requirements do I have. For example, you could think about switching. Let's talk about switches. Switches will provide a lot of logs. You will have two kinds of logs. You will have administrative logs for your switches, which means who is logging in, who will make the changes, and what's happening on the config side of the switches. But your switch will also have NetFlow logs. Packet A is going to destination B and C and redirected to place X and Y. You have to think about what kind of intelligence you want to build onto Azure Sentinel to provide added value to that data. For example, for switching, I think it's a best practice to push out the administrative logs into Azure Sentinel to be able to see, okay, who's changing the config, who is logging in from what IP address to guard the integrity of the switch. But when you're really starting to talk about NetFlow logs, don't do it without any reason. If you have a valid use case, that's fine, go ahead, but think about what data you're putting into Azure Sentinel. Because when you're pushing in data without a built-in connector for Azure Sentinel, you will not have any Microsoft provided alert rules, for example. So within each query, you will see the related content. This means which kind of content, which kind of rules and workbooks are already available by Microsoft, which give you an idea of some of the examples you can do with that data, some of the alert rules you want to create, and get you on the way with the data. If you create your own sign-on logs, your own data connectors, you have to think about what is the data, how can I analyze it, and what kind of added value can I bring to this data? So it's important to think about it. So if we have that data, the data connectors configured, we can look into, okay, when do I want to receive a alert or incident for the data I have configured? For that, we can go to Analytics, and here we will see in one page all of the active rules. So these are rules Microsoft has enabled by default. These are the anomaly rules I talked about, but there are also rule templates. So rule templates are a really easy way to get going because they provide you an idea of how you should be configuring your queries, your analytic rules. So it's a great place to start if you're just starting out with Azure Sentinel. Look into the rule templates and see some of the example Microsoft gives you. What is really nice is you can filter for data source, and you could, for example, select Azure Active Directory, and you will see all the rules based on Azure Active Directory. So if you've just enabled that connector, you can look and see, okay, what kind of rules is Microsoft providing? If we take a look at, for example, first access credential added to an application, this will provide you an idea of what kind of alert rule it is, what is it for, why should you care, the data source, and then the rule query and some information about the rule. So then if you decide, okay, I want to move forward with this rule, it's really easy to create a rule, and then you immediately all of the data, the configuration of the rule will be filled in. So what you could do is you go to review and create, and you can create an analytic rule without thinking about it. So this is a really easy way to start off with Azure Sentinel and use the intelligence Microsoft has provided. Of course, it's good to look into all of the different tabs within this rule to look into, okay, how is it being configured? What is the query being used? When is it running? Is it running each hour, each day, every 5 minutes? These are some things to look into, and also combine your requirements with the specific rule. For example, if there is really an action you do not want to allow, this rule should probably run every 5 minutes compared to every day, because of course, when the rule runs every day, you will be alerted much later than when the rule runs every 5 minutes. But if you go to the end of the rule, we can easily create a rule, and the rule will be created. Now, we will see it in the active rules tab. You can also, of course, create your own rules. So that this is what we do on the top. You can create, and you have two options. The Microsoft Incident Creation rule is a way to ingest alerts from different Microsoft security products, such as Identity Protection, Microsoft Defender, Azure Defender, and create incidents and alerts into Azure Sentinel for it. So this is a great way because, as you probably know, if you're managing a Microsoft 365 or Azure environment, there are lots of different security products out there. They all have their own portal. And if you want to manage and look into these incidents and alerts for these different products, you have to look into each of these portals separately to make sure that there are no additional incidents. So with these Microsoft incident creation rules, it's really easy to aggregate all of the alerts and incidents into one place to ensure you're never losing visibility on top of your entire environment. So if you want to create a custom query based on your own data, you would be using a scheduled query rule. Here we can provide a name, of course. So just give this as an example. We can provide it a Mitre attack tactic. This is based on the Mitre attack framework, which is a generic framework used within the cybersecurity workspace. If you don't know it, your CISO or CIO probably will, and they love it. It's a great way to look into what stage the attack is in. For example, is it an initial access? Is the user trying to log in? Or is it in command and control? Is it trying to, is a PC already breached and trying to reach out to the mothership to have more, to receive more instructions on what to do next? For example, look for administrative accounts. If we're talking about sign-in logs, we're often talking about initial access, and then we can change the severity of that incident. So then we go to set rule logic, and here we can create the rule. So this rule you should create is to see, okay, when do you want to be alerted when something happens within these logs? You can create your own rule through KQL, which is the QSTO query language. And by this, you can easily look into the data that you have within your environment to create certain conditions when an alert or incident should be created. I just enabled the data connector for sign-in log, so I don't have any data in here just now, but I will go to another environment and just quickly show you what the Azure Sentinel environment with data actually looks like. So here we can go to Azure Sentinel and go to my test environment. And if we click on logs here, we will be greeted with the typical log analytics screen. And here we can also see the tables that are configured currently within this environment. So we can see typical Azure Sentinel tables. We can see custom tables that we are creating, or you can see tables that are also built in, integrated. For example, these sign-in logs. You can double click on it. And if we do a take 10, this will retrieve the first 10 rows in that table. And here we can really easily explore that data. So we can look into the data and see, okay, this is a sign-in log from my colleague Glenn, who is logging in from Belgium. If you have specific requirements, you can now build your query to look for specific use cases you want to be alerted upon. For example, if my colleague Glenn is logging in, I can just quickly click here and do include, and this will itself add a value aware clause to check, okay, when there is a sign-in log from Glenn. So now we can run this again, and if we can check, only the sign-in logs from Glenn are appearing. Of course, we can also do this manually, so we could create a query if the app Glenn is using is logging in as Azure Portal. So here we will see all the sign-in logs from Glenn to the Azure Portal. This is not something you want to be alerted on, probably, but you could maybe report on the result type. The result type of a sign-in log is the sign-in log successful or not? 0 means successful, another number means not successful. So we could do, and the result type cannot equal 0. So this will retrieve all of the failed sign-in logs for my colleague Glenn. If you would want to stalk your colleague, this might be a great query to a great analytic rule to create. So we can go to analytics. We can go to create again, scheduled query rule. Here we can go to sign-in logs anomaly. If I can type choose initial access, and I can add the query here. So now this query will see if there is a hit, if Glenn is trying to log into the Azure portal, but his sign-in will fail, an alert will be created, and this rule will be matched. We have a few options here, for example, at entity mapping. Here you can tell Azure Sentinel, for example, which column of this return is the account name. This would be, for example, the user principal name. Why is this useful? Well, this is extremely useful for UEBA, which is the User Entity Behavior Analytics. It's a built-in product from Azure Sentinel. We'll touch upon it later. And it's also used in an automation. So it's really important you create these entity mappings. Here you can configure when the rule should be running. So for example, we can say it should run every 5 minutes and look up the data from the last 5 minutes. And then we go to incident settings. This will mean, should we create an incident for this or not? If you select this to disabled, only alerts will be created, no incidents. An alert isn't something that's being surfaced within the Azure Sentinel console. If we take a look again back to our test environment, here we see incidents. This is something you can clearly see, and an incident is something that you want to be alerted for because it requires immediate action. It should be almost 80% likely it's a true positive. An alert is something that is not noteworthy, but could be something interesting if you want to investigate it further, or if it's combined with a different alert. Let's take the example of my colleague Glenn again. Well, if he fails his sign-in into the Azure portal, should you really care? Because he might just be typing in his passwords wrong. What we could do is we could create another analytic rule that checks if Glenn is creating a message rule, a Outlook rule, which will forward all his email to an external user. If Glenn is spelling his sign-ins and there is a mail forward rule, this might be something noteworthy to investigate. And then you could choose, okay, I want to create an incident for that. So you should be able to distinguish between what is an alert, what is an incident, and what do you want to investigate. So if we go back to my test environment, you can select, okay, I want to receive an incident from it. And then we go to automated response. Here we can call different logic apps. So we can see here there's references playbooks within the Azure Sentinel portal. Here we can choose, okay, when a certain alert or incident is created, we should run a specific logic app. So here again, we have the distinction between alert automation and incident automation. When should you be using one of the two? Well, alert automation could be enrichments. For example, if Glenn has a failed sign-in into the Azure portal, I want to run a Azure Logic app that will go out to a cloud service with IP reputation, and it will provide me if this is an IP linked to malware, if it's linked to a botnet, if it's a known VPN. I will combine that data with the alert, and then I can choose, okay, if the alert from Glenn failing to sign into the Azure portal is combined with the fact that this IP is known to be malicious, I will create an incident. When we're talking about incident automation, a great use case for that is, for example, to sync between Azure Sentinel and your ITSM tool, because most likely most of the organization is monitoring that ITSM tool actively. And the reporting is also done based on that ITSM tool. With Azure Logic Apps, you can easily synchronize incidents between Azure Sentinel and your third-party ITSM tool to make sure those two are in sync. For example, what I have developed for my company is we have a sync between Azure Sentinel and Jira Service Management from Atlassian, which makes sure the SOC analysts only have to monitor Jira, which will have all of the alerts across the different customers, and then they can go from Azure Sentinel, from Jira, to the Azure Sentinel customers environment. But of course, this is not mandatory. And when you're just starting out, you can start without automation. And when you are seeing all of the incidents appear, you can see, okay, I would like to automate some of the actions I'm doing. And then you can look into some of the automation capabilities within Azure Sentinel. So we will click review and we will create this query. It might fail because the sign and logs table is not there yet. It seems to be working. That's great. Okay. And then this query is created, and we will see the sign and logs anomaly analytic rule we have just created. Starting off with Azure Sentinel can be a little bit tricky, especially if you don't know KQL. There is a great course on Pluralsight for it. It's free if you just want to start learning KQL. Another great resource is the Azure Sentinel community. If we go to the community tab within Azure Sentinel, we can go to the Azure community, which is GitHub. I will try to zoom in again. Within GitHub, we have actually, these are some of these contributions are from Microsoft, others are from the community. For example, there is a folder called detections, which holds analytic rules. And here we can see all of the analytic rules that has been enabled within this Azure Sentinel GitHub, for example, from the community. We could be looking into, for example, the folder qualies, and here we will see specific detections for qualies. Remember that some of these alert rules are not available within the Azure Sentinel overview, the Azure Sentinel portal. So if you're just starting out, you can first focus on the templates, then look into Azure Sentinel GitHub. And if Azure Sentinel GitHub doesn't provide enough information, you can create your own rules and provide your own logic. And ideally, of course, push your custom rule also to the Azure Sentinel GitHub so other members of the community can also learn from what you have done for your own. So right now we have collected data from different data sources. We put it inside of log analytics, where we can see within logs the raw logs. We have created analytic rules to create alerts or incidents based on that data. What else can we do? Well, one of these things is automation, of course. This is what I touched upon before. You will see all of the playbooks and rules that we have configured to automate some of the actions. So it's really easy to create a logic app. So we click add a playbook, and here we will be diverted to another side of the Azure portal, which will enable us to create a brand new logic app. And here we can create our own logic that we want. But of course, know that within Azure Sentinel, there is also a folder called Playbooks, which holds all of the Azure Sentinel playbooks that have been provided by the community. Right now, Azure Sentinel doesn't have a templates kind of way for playbooks. Just like you see in analytic rules, here you see rule templates. This isn't available for playbooks. So if you want to see playbooks, you should be going to the Azure Sentinel GitHub and view all of the playbooks there. It seems that my portal doesn't want to load. So let's try to manually create a rule just to show you how a logic app looks like and what you can do with it. But it appears my portal is also down. That's not great. Just checking if my connection to the meeting is still okay. Can you still hear me fine?
Yes.
Okay, thank you guys. So it seems to be the Azure portal is having some issues. We'll try to work with it as we go. So I'll skip the playbook, the Azure Logic App for now. What can we also do with Azure Sentinel is we can create the workbooks which will visualize the data. So here we can create workbooks to have your own needs. This could help you during an investigation. This could be to report to management. For example, there are some great built-in workbooks templates about Azure Sentinel, about Azure AD sign-in logs. This is again provided by Microsoft, and we can view this template, and this will be filled in with our data. So if we wait a little bit, of course, I don't have any data within this environment, so I'll quickly switch to my test environment, which already has some data. So we'll search for the sign-in logs workbook here. We can view the template, and here we will see it's just a simple visualization of these sign-in logs, like we just watched, where we saw all these sign-ins from my colleague Glenn. Here you can really have a visualization of these same sign-in logs, but it just provides a nicer experience if you want to, again, report to your manager, your boss, your CISO. It's a great way and really simple to create a workbook and then present that workbook to your management to create some reports. Again, here we again have the option to have templates provided by Microsoft. You can create your own workbooks if you want. But of course, some of these workbooks are also available within the Azure Sentinel community behind the workbooks folder. So we have touched upon most of the bigger parts of Azure Sentinel. There are also, of course, some minor parts, which, for example, is entity behavior, the UEBA, which I just talked about. I will quickly show you this before I return to the conclusion. So UEBA will actually monitor entities, which could be accounts or IPs, and it will provide additional insights into these. For example, you can see which of my users is having the most alerts, which could mean an attack. So for example, my colleague Olivier has 100 alerts more than the second colleague on this list. This could be something you want to investigate. So UEBA has some additional information that's provided by Azure Sentinel that will provide additional logic so that you can use, and it will also ease your investigations. Because if you go to an incident, let's hope I have some entities in this environment, I can create full details, or I can click directly on the entity itself. And we click on the entity, we will find information about my colleague. We will see his UPN, but also his country and his job title. And we will also see, which I love, as the timeline. Here we can see the previous alerts that were happening for my colleague Glenn. So if you're investigating an incident that looks like a benign positive, but you're not sure, you can look into the entity page of that user, see what the history of that user is. Then you can say, okay, he has already had a couple of different alerts. These were always a false positive. This can also be a false positive. So UBA is a great way to help you with your investigation. Of course, this is a really quick run through of the Azure Sentinel portal. There's some great things to also check out, which is hunting rules, notebooks, watch lists. If you have the time, I really advise you to just look into the Azure portal and see what Azure Sentinel has to offer. It's easy to navigate, and it doesn't require a lot of setup work, as you have seen. You can enable Azure Sentinel within 5 minutes. You can configure it as you like, but it's important to start small and then build up your use cases and improve the product itself. So with that, we have come to the conclusion. Let me quickly pull up my last slide. So what is the last thing I want to talk about? Is what should you remember from the session, and where do I see the added value from Azure Sentinel? One of the things is the built-in connectors. Microsoft has a lot of connectors, of course, to Microsoft products, like you've seen to Azure AD, to Microsoft Defender. It's really integrated within the whole Microsoft suite. This is why it's so easy to set up Azure Sentinel and to ingest all of your incidents from the different Microsoft security products. And within 10 minutes of work, and for almost no additional cost, I think it's about €5 if you just ingest all of the alerts from the different products. You have a single pane of glass across your entire environment. And then you can start adding your own data connectors and look into some specific use cases. Because again, I cannot stress it enough. Do not just put in data into Azure Sentinel without thinking about it. Build up your business requirements, build up specific use cases to be able to ensure Azure Sentinel has its use and is not sitting there gathering money from Microsoft. Third point, next to building connectors and integration, is GitHub. Azure Sentinel has a really active community, which also is just available in this session. We're talking about Azure Sentinel. It's a Friday night. We're sitting here trying to learn about Azure Sentinel. That says something about the community. But also the GitHub page, which I have mentioned a few times, is a really great resource to look into what is the community doing and how can I use what the community is doing to augment my own work. Then last but not least, of course, is automation. Because Azure Sentinel uses Azure Logic Apps for its automation capabilities, it's really easy to automate some of the mundane tasks that you might be doing. IP enrichment, automatically disabling users when there is high severity alerts, synchronizing your Azure Sentinel environment with your ITSM tool. These are things that can be automated with Azure Sentinel and Logic Apps. And it's so easy because Azure Sentinel is just like Power Automate. I like to call it Lego. You can build your building blocks, just build your own Logic app. You don't have to be a developer. As a SOC analyst, you can really easily start to create your use cases and start to build your own automation capabilities. So with that, we have come to the end of the session. I hope this has provided you with an introduction into Azure Sentinel and you're kind of triggered to look into Azure Sentinel yourself. I think it's a great product that's really getting traction now and has a lot of active developments on it. I hope you have enjoyed this session and received the necessary information. If you have some questions, feel free to drop them in chat or come off mute. But again, a big thank you to Trago for organizing this event and to the sponsors. And thank you for your attention, everybody. I see somebody typing in the chat, so I'll just await that question. What do you mean about the CloudEight community or about a session that I'm presenting?
Well, I'll answer by audio if you don't mind.
That's perfect. That's a little bit easier.
So it was a coincidence that I saw on LinkedIn that you were presenting this session. So I jumped in at the last minute. I thought it was really interesting. I love the small to the point sessions. And I was wondering if you have new sessions, what's the best way to be notified of those? And can we see the recording you are making? Because I think some of my colleagues will be interested too.
Yes, so one of the options, of course, is to follow me on Twitter and LinkedIn, but that's something you might miss. On my blog post, I just linked as a specific web page I use to keep all my future sessions, but also my past sessions. And if there is a recording that's available, because I know, for example, the CloudEight Summit will provide the recordings on YouTube, I will also update that link on my website to reflect to the recording of the session. But when I have a recorded session available, I always try to notify on Twitter as well.
Okay, I'll monitor your blog page. That will be the easiest. Thanks a lot.
Right. Thank you for your for being here. I really enjoyed giving this session. If there's any questions, feel free to reach out to LinkedIn, Twitter, my blog. And again, a big thank you to Traeger.